Just north of what was once and for many hundreds of years the Arab town of Jaffa is Tel Aviv, the largest city in the modern state of Israel. Most of the town's younger people were born here, but many of the older ones come from elsewhere. From Russia, Poland, Germany, Hungary. With them they have brought European attitudes, styles, and memories. Many are the survivors of Hitler, of a great European catastrophe. To the Arabs, who once formed a huge majority of the population in the area, the newcomers themselves represent a kind of catastrophe. To them, the trickle of Jews, which began in the last century and became a flood in this one, is an offense, an intrusion into their country. What the Arabs now see there is a European state with its own exclusive culture and traditions. It's a state whose impressive achievements are sustained and morally supported by rich Jews from abroad. It's an advanced state, technically and educationally, a painful reminder of their own shortcomings in these respects. The presence now of such a state within their homeland is to the Arabs a deep wrong, an expropriation, a humiliation. The legitimacy, the right to exist at all, which that state defends, is to many of them deeply suspect. In the hostility which surrounds it, Israel is of necessity a fortress. Its dispute with its neighbors is bitter and intractable. It admits of few compromises. The city of Tel Aviv was founded on the sandy coastal plain near Jaffa in 1909. The conflict was a smaller one then, but some of its essential elements were present. The Zionist pioneers who built it saw in their return to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, the fulfillment of their own lives and that of a high and noble national enterprise too. The rebuilding of the Jewish state and the Jewish personality in their ancient land. It was a land, they believed, whose title came to them rightfully from history and the Bible. This entitlement they were to confirm, they felt, by their labor, by their love, and even by their blood. Redeeming the land, to use the Zionist phrase. What sort of land were they coming to? Towards the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Turks, who ruled the place then, had built a railway system. So a visitor to the Holy Land at that time would have been able to make the journey from Jaffa to Jerusalem by train. On that journey, the landscape was often a barren one. One Zionist was to refer to Palestine later as a land without a people without a people for a people without a land. Versions of this myth have persisted. But in fact, and of course although far from rich, it wasn't a desert. Real people and a real society existed there. In 1913, the population of Palestine, the word is a vague one as no political entity corresponding to it existed, is estimated to have been about 600,000 people. But it could have been substantially less or more. This population was largely Arab and largely Muslim. By present-day standards, most of the people were poor. The greater part of them were felachin, peasant farmers living off the land. They were the tenants of wealthy landowners who lived in the towns, Nablus or Jerusalem, or if they were from the north, perhaps Beirut. In addition to farming, there was fishing and a range of domestic industries and crafts. The town of Jaffa, where the harbour had been rebuilt in the 1880s, was a busy port. Goods for export were handled there. Citrus fruit, a particularly good variety of barley for the beer drinkers of England, olive oil, soap from a small factory in Nablus. Palestine was not the jewel in the Ottoman Empire's crown. Damascus and Beirut were more important than Jerusalem, but neither was it an obscure backwater. The Holy Land seaboard gave it plenty of contact, centuries old, with Europe. There was, not surprisingly, since it was the Holy Land, a flourishing tourist industry. Anton Attila, a young man before the First World War, remembers this.
Life was easy. It was easy, an easy-going life. Most of the people of Jerusalem flourished actually during these months between March and May, springtime. It's the time when pilgrims used to flock from all over the world, particularly from Russia until 1917. And you had several thousand every year, perhaps 100,000 pilgrims. Sometimes they used to walk through Palestine from one end to the other, coming through Jerusalem. And of course, traders made a lot of money, either by exchanging money or selling their goods and doing services of various kinds. The tourist business was very flourishing.
In Jerusalem, as in the other cities of the Ottoman Empire, there was a small aristocratic Muslim class. They were the notables, the ayan, literally the eyes of society, landowners, merchants, state officials. They provided the community's religious leadership and monopolized between them what political power was available. The houses these aristocrats lived in were large and well appointed. The interiors of these houses, this one's now a hotel, convey something of the elegance and sophistication of the style of life they led. These were the people who mattered. Their children were educated abroad, or perhaps at the English Cathedral School of St. George in Jerusalem. The great names of these rival families or clans still dominate the school's honours board. Nashishibis, Husseinis, Khalidis. What sort of people were they?
Now, those ayan were the people around which, as I said, society moved. Now, they had two things in common. First, they felt that they were the bearers of the heritage of the culture and civilization. They were very much interested in their houses, in collecting things for their sort of representing their families. It may be an old carpet, a rug, it may be an old sword, but all these things counted for them. They felt they were the bearers, especially, I think, the ulama, leading Muslim learned people. This is one. That's their duty. Now, they expected, as a sort of reciprocal arrangement, that people would owe them loyalty. They, on their own, would owe loyalty to the state or the country. So this intermixture of social feeling was a very pleasant thing. I do remember things of it because I lived the first few years of my life in Damascus. And I do remember both Christians and Muslims who had this position. There would be the big merchants in the town and so on. They felt the city was theirs, but not theirs alone.
Most of the citizens of Ottoman Jerusalem and its neighborhood found the framework for their lives in Islam. Islam gave them their identity and governed everything else, the way they conducted business as much as the way they felt. In this respect, they didn't differ from Muslims anywhere. Their uniqueness lay in where they lived. In Jerusalem, at the dome of the Holy Rock, a reminder of over 1,000 years of the Arab-Muslim presence. The Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. At the nearby Al-Aqsa Mosque, Muslims believe that the end of days, a kind of Muslim last judgment, will take place. They felt at home. The sense of ownership, the attachment to place was inevitably strong.
So this is one thing. Throughout Islamic history, Jerusalem had this position. It was strengthened at certain times for political reasons, such as under the Umayyads, where it was difficult to go perform the pilgrimage in Mecca and Medina. So people were encouraged to go to Jerusalem. Later on, a feeling developed about Jerusalem itself that a pilgrimage is not a complete one unless one visited Jerusalem. I mean, a Muslim pilgrimage. And that applied mostly to people who traveled from far. In the sense, all right, you have traveled from, say, Mali or Ghana or from Central Asia to do the pilgrimage. You might as well go to Jerusalem also. It didn't apply so much to people who lived in the neighboring areas. So this strengthened the position of Jerusalem. During the times of the Crusaders, shortly before, but during the times of the Crusaders and after that, an enormous lot of literature, Islamic literature, praised the values and the importance of Jerusalem as a center of Islamic world. Now, if we remember also that in Palestine, Jordan, and Syria, a large number of the companions of the Prophet are buried, those people who died in the very early conquests in this part of the world. So this is where Palestine in general and Jerusalem in particular gain a special position in Islamic feeling, literature, and holiness.
Until the British came in 1917, the land that for convenience we can call Palestine was part of a large, rickety, but long-enduring Ottoman Empire. In modern Israel, relics of that empire are not particularly honoured. The historical passion of the newcomers is for a yet more distant past, a biblical past which confirms their own historical claim to the land. But the evidence of long years of Ottoman rule is inescapably present. The great walls which surround the old city of Jerusalem, built by the Sultan at the end of the 16th century, are still the most striking reminder that for 400 years Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. And the walls whose minarets blend with fortifications reveal the special character of that empire, its Islamic nature. The Sultan who ruled it was also Caliph, religious head of Islam. His temporal power had a religious sanction. In general, the Muslim Arabs didn't feel oppressed.
I don't think that the people considered the Turks as aliens, as they did the British and the French later on. They were considered to be sort of altogether one, as I said earlier, one culture, one civilization, one flag, one religion. After all, the Ottoman Empire was the last of the great Muslim states. And insofar as Islam is the religion of the majority of the people in the Arab world, there's no doubt in my mind that the consensus of feeling, if not opinion, during that period was that, all right, we are all one thing, we belong to the same type of culture, we have lived together, so there is no need for separation.
The Sultan Caliph of the crumbling Ottoman Empire in the last decades of the 19th century was this man, Abdul Hamid II. He had come to the throne in 1876 and was to rule until he was deposed in 1908. Throughout his long reign, Abdul Hamid looked with sour disfavour on the influx of Jews into his Arab provinces. As early as 1882, he began to impose restrictions against Jewish immigration and land purchase, but he failed. During his reign, the Jewish population increased from about 25,000 to something like 80,000. This scene at Rishon-LeZion in 1911 shows by how much he failed. Why? The answer lies partly in the political structure of the country at this time. It was divided into provinces and districts, known as vilayets and sanyaks. Jerusalem and its district was an independent sanyak. Its governor dealt directly with Constantinople, without going through Beirut and Damascus. Politically, the land of Sham, or Syria as it was known, wasn't an entity. the multiplicity of officials and administrators who ran it were not uniformly efficient at implementing government policy, nor equally enthusiastic about doing so, and some were dishonest and could be bought. Jerusalem itself posed special problems. First, because immigrants could disappear into the long-established Jewish community which lived there. And then there were the tourists. Entering as such, many Jews simply stayed. Under old treaty agreements, the European powers offered protection to their own nationals. These privileges could be invoked by any Jew with a valid foreign passport. So keeping the Jews out was very difficult, and the Sultan failed to do so. Not all the Jews in Palestine, though, were modern immigrant Zionists. In towns like this one, Safed, there were and still are long-established Jewish communities. This old synagogue was built by Sephardic Jews from Spain in the 16th century. The people who use it now and still live in the town have been there for generations. But these people defined themselves through their religion. They had no political or national ambitions. Again, in Jerusalem, there'd been an increasing and virtually continuous Jewish presence for hundreds of years. But these older pre-Zionist Jews fitted harmoniously enough into a predominantly Arab culture, often spoke Arabic, and earned their living as craftsmen and traders. Judaism for them had not yet been secularized into a set of political goals.
I can tell you one case of like my family. I know my forefathers came from Turkey. That was almost 300 years ago. They came to Jerusalem. The first one who came, we don't know much about him. We know a lot about his son, and he was a rabbi. And he came here because this is the land of our forefathers. It was destroyed by our sins. We have to make good and come back and rebuild it through prayers. And they were, I would say, dreamers and builders, workers. They were artisans. They were, many of them spent all their time just praying and learning and studying. I would say it was not an organized thing. It was more an individual urge of people to come and settle here. I would say that after the Jews were expelled from Spain in the end of the 15th century, it was a catastrophe of those days. People who were well-to-do and well-established, suddenly they found themselves, they were expelled, undesired, and many of them came here because they thought that the Messiah will come only when your sufferings reach a climax, and they thought that was a climax. Well, they didn't know that Hitler would be another climax. And they came here, they thought that would be the end of sufferings, and they dedicated themselves to, as I said, to prayers and studying and reviving the Jewish heritage, and serve in their personal life as a model to what honesty should be, righteousness.
In 1882, the first new colonies began to appear. Indeed, there's still something faintly colonial in the appearance of little towns like Zikron Yaakov. The people who came here were European settlers. And as employers, they rubbed along more or less satisfactorily with the Arabs who worked for them. But shortly after the turn of the century, settlers who appeared to the Arabs much more abrasive made their appearance. They were modern in outlook, socialist Zionists, committed to the idea of using exclusively Jewish labor. They found it necessary to arm themselves. By 1914, Jewish agricultural settlements were dotted all over the area, ignoring the boundaries of vilayet and sanyak, province and district. In a sense, the Jews were defining, in their biblical claims, the area which later Arab nationalists would think of as an entity. But Arab nationalism at this stage expressed itself largely as a response to the Jews, as anti-Zionism. In 1908, the Committee for Union and Progress, the Young Turks, seized power in Constantinople, and something new took place. Abdul Hamid was deposed. The new rulers were in a sense modern. An Ottoman parliament was re-established. Newspapers and political comment began to flourish. Anti-Zionism became public.
In the early years of the 20th century, people were generally, and the public was aware of the danger and the menace of Zionist immigration into the country. They really were worried about it, and we have our two Arabic daily papers, one in Haifa, Al-Carmel, which named after Mount Carmel, you see, and one in Jaffa, named after Palestine, Palestine in Arabic is Palestine. Both of them were writing almost daily against the threatened migration into Palestine of Jews en masse.
The situation is characterized in this cartoon which appeared in an Arab newspaper in 1911. Salah al-Din, or Saladin as we know him, defeater of the Crusaders, addresses a Jew. "Keep away from this fortress, you swindler, or else I will set upon you the armies of my descendants. You will not come near a fortress I conquered with my Arab blood." And the Jew replies, "As long as my foreign passport is in my pocket, and there are £15 million to sate the notables and to cure the itch of the high officials, I care not." The foreign passport gave the Jew protection under the European consul from Ottoman laws. The money bribed the very corruptible officials charged by the Sultan with stopping Jewish immigration and land purchase. In 1914, Hragib al-Nashishibi, a leading Jerusalem notable, stood for the Ottoman Parliament. He said in his election address, "If I am elected as a deputy, I will dedicate all my strength day and night to remove the damage and danger awaiting us through the Zionists and Zionism."
But there were other candidates. All the candidates at the time had the question of anti-Zionism on their platform. And of course, it was a very touchy question over here. And of course, although villagers, most of these people owned sometimes villages, you see, or large plantations. They had tenants on their lands, and their tenants would certainly, most definitely, elect them, you see, vote for them. But there were other candidates who also had the same thing, but almost every candidate at the time had on his platform that they must, when they got into parliament in Istanbul, fight against Zionism, you see. So Zionism, it started really much earlier than even the British entry and the Balfour Declaration here.
It was in 1917 that the British were to establish themselves by conquest as the new rulers of Palestine. The once mighty power of the Ottoman Empire was broken. Beneath the great walls of the city, Jerusalem's dignitaries, Arab and Jew, assembled to greet their new masters. The soldiers who stood there to receive those greetings served an alien government already committed to the Zionist cause. It was a commitment which would enlarge and intensify a conflict which had already taken root.